The Sonic series is one that has always deeply fascinated me. Something about the idea of a speedy platformer is just so enticing. The concept has a lot of potential to be extremely interesting and extremely unique. Most people know that Sonic is supposed to be the speedy boy. That's who he is. He's the fast fellow. He's got to move pretty quick. However, I don't really think his series actually truly encapsulates this idea of the speedy guy. I mean, when you look at his games, well, it's been a bit of a mixed bag, to say the least. Before we talk about exactly why a lot of Sonic games fall short of Sonic's true potential, we need to discuss exactly what makes the prospect of a speedy game so enticing in the first place. On the surface level, going fast is fun. Like, yeah, look at this. It makes the happy chemicals go brrr. You get to feel really cool when you're going so fast that you can barely comprehend the level. It's an immediate gratification that is satisfying for a couple moments, however, the novelty of rapid spatial displacement can only last for so long. See, the thing that actually makes a speedy game so engaging to play isn't the physical speed itself. It's instead maintaining and building said speed. Back when the original Sonic game was released, games didn't really have any saving systems. You kinda just go back to the start of the game whenever you run out of lives, or you just have to do something else with your life that isn't playing Sonic. And because of this, players often had to retread through the same few first levels countless times. Over and over and over and over and over again. And if your first few levels aren't that replayable, well, you then suddenly have a bit of a problem on your hands, because being forced to trudge through the same thing over and over and over and over and over again is going to get annoying pretty quick if the level isn't built around it. A lot of games around the time had to come up with clever solutions to make sure that this boring, tedious repetition could be minimized as much as possible. Some games went the Punch-Out route, where the game just gives you a code you can write down so you can skip to specific parts of the game. Mario has well-hidden warp zones that allow you to skip massive portions of the game. Sonic, however, tries a very different approach. The developers of the original Sonic game were fascinated by the various hidden paths in the very first level of Mario Bros. How they were new things to discover that you might not find on your first time through. Just this one little room, for example, adds an entire layer of replayability. And there is kind of a sense of satisfaction when it comes to optimizing your path through a level and just clearing it in only a matter of seconds. So, what if you built an entire game around the idea of discovering new paths and making optimizations inside of levels that you've already completed? What if the whole point of the game was that it was fun to have to go through the first few levels over and over again? Because the game is designed around you finding clever ways to maintain your momentum and clear it faster and faster every time. And thus, the philosophy for Sonic was born. This idea of building a game around the concept of repetition, of optimizing your route, or discovering new things about a level is one that a lot of games use nowadays. Take the Hitman series, for example. Those games are all about crafting the perfect assassination. You learn each level intimately so that you can pull off the job with precision, speed, stealth, and efficiency. Sure, you can just go and kill the dude and then run out and be all sloppy, but that's not very fun. So, you're encouraged to go back and try to learn all the guards' routes and figure out the layout to be able to, well, be an invisible killer. In Mario Kart games, the most interesting tracks are the ones that you can optimize, ones that you can constantly come back to and find small shortcuts and new optimizations. Anything that can get you a step ahead of the item chaos. It's a whole subgenre of game, and when executed well, it leads to some of the most satisfying, engaging, and replayable experiences on the market. And logically, a platformer series, such as Sonic, would be basically perfect for this template of a game. These concepts of being faster and coming up with clever routes. This design philosophy as a whole is just such a natural direction for a branch of the platforming genre to go in. Which is why I personally find the Sonic series, which is gaming's most popular attempt at a repetition-based platformer, so, well, disappointing. Okay, well, maybe not entirely disappointing. I don't think the series is overall bad. There are a couple stinkers. There's some really bad stinkers. However, there are quite a few really well-made games. I just don't think it really gets to the point of what it could be. I don't think it really achieves what Sonic is capable of. 'Cause, well, even in the best games in the series, Sonic kind of fumbles in some bafflingly stupid ways. Take the original Sonic game, for example. It starts with one of the best first levels in gaming history. Green Hill Zone is basically the perfect introduction to the game. It's got a catchy song, it's got great visuals, it's got branching paths, it's got loop-de-loops. There's a reason that SEGA keeps trying to bring this place back in every single Sonic game. I mean, alright, well, the boss against Eggman at the end of Green Hill Zone was pretty dumb, but to be fair, gaming as a whole was still kinda trying to figure out the whole boss battle thing. With such an incredible start, I can't wait to see how the game evolves upon the ideas with the second zone. I mean, surely things can only go up from here, right? Is this even the same game? What the heck is this? Marble Zone is kinda where the whole game starts to completely fall apart. For some baffling reason, the Sonic team decided that the best way to comfortably place their game about a speedy, cool, chili dog-loving goober is to intentionally make very slow-paced, cycle-based platforming in cramped areas with little to no slopes to gain speed off of. Alright, the idea was supposedly to structure Sonic like a roller coaster, with high points and low points to prevent players from getting overwhelmed. Neat, cool, good, great, amazing idea, fantastic thinking. One small problem. Sonic does not at all work well with slower-paced precision platforming. Sonic, in the original games, is extremely momentum-based. It takes him a while to speed up, and it takes him a while to slow back down. This naturally complements the idea that you're supposed to be trying to maintain momentum, and leads to fun situations where you can, like, use slopes to build up speed and engage with the level design in a fun way to maximize your speed. Problem is, well, it feels god-awful when you're stuck doing slow, precision platforming. Way back in Green Hill Zone, sections like this weren't much of a problem. The whole point was basically that you were trying to just have enough speed to completely bypass any sections of the level that slow you down. But here, it is genuinely just unavoidable. You have to sit there and deal with some of the most frustratingly terrible platforming you could find in a game. And what's even better is that Marble Zone still isn't the worst offender, by far. This is Labyrinth Zone. Labyrinth Zone is genuinely one of the worst gaming experiences you can get. This footage, by the way, this is from a speedrun. This is not what a speedrun of a game that is supposed to be about the fastest thing alive should look like! On top of that, the other supposedly speedy levels don't quite reach the same level of quality as Green Hill does. It's pretty clear that the designers didn't quite know how to properly ramp up the difficulty when it came to Sonic's movement. Both Scrap Brain and Springyard Stone still have a lot more sections that just end up being unavoidable snags. Like this part here with the lowering blocks. Outside of just not interacting with this part of the level at all, you have to sit there and wait. Which is unfortunate, because it kind of feels like a slap in the face in a way. There are a lot of level gimmicks and ideas that kind of just, well, make you stop moving for a bit, which feels especially awful when you want to be trying to go really fast. Okay, well, the first game was still extremely well received. Despite its many shortcomings, the idea that Green Hill Zone promised was enticing enough to get people hooked. And, to be honest, the next two entries in the series, Sonic 2 and then Sonic 3 and Knuckles, plus Sonic CD, but that one's kind of an oddball that I don't know too much about, so we're just gonna kind of ignore it for now, alright? Alright, cool. Anyway, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, and Knuckles, pretty good. However, a couple problems. Now, the problems that I think they have aren't massive, game-ending, ruining problems like Marble Zone and Labyrinth Zone in their first Sonic game. However, I still think they kind of hold Sonic back just a little bit. It prevents it from being a great game and keeps it as just a good game. Remember how I was talking a little bit about the level gimmicks that don't really work well with Sonic's design, that do nothing but slow the game down? Yeah, Sonic 2 and its sequel do have that in spades. There's this infamous section in Chemical Plant Zone from Sonic 2. There's stuff where you gotta, like, stand in an elevator for a bit. These obnoxious barrels. There's this whole, like, pinball thing that's just not at all worth it to interact with if you want to be going fast. The games are filled with all these unique level concepts, but in order to go as fast as possible, oftentimes the ideal strategy is just to avoid all of the cool things the level's trying to do whenever possible. If it's even possible in the first place. You have to actively avoid engaging with the level, which I find kind of unfortunate, because I think there's a lot of untapped potential when it comes to unique stage props and ideas. Things that can enhance the idea of speed and put unique twists on it. Sonic 3 and Knuckles specifically also really likes to showcase these little cinematic-esque sections where you just kind of lose all control and then Sonic does a thing or gets zoomed along. It's the catharsis you get from moving really fast without any of the nuance behind earning it. And it's even worse when you kind of just have to lose all of your momentum because of these sections. Now, as I've already said, these are pretty minor problems, but I really wish I could get to experience a game with the same design ideas as Sonic that just doesn't have these snags. And while the existing Sonic games at this point, other than Sonic 1, were not at all terrible, I don't quite feel like they properly, truly achieved the goal the designers were trying to go for. They don't really capture the essence of what Sonic can be nearly as well as some of the Mario games that were coming out at the time, like Super Mario World. This, I think, is partly the fault of Sonic's moveset, which is quite simplistic. This isn't to say that a simplistic moveset is a bad thing necessarily, however, a simple moveset does limit how the developers are able to develop upon the core gameplay ideas of Sonic. Outside of just not hitting enemies or walls, there isn't really much you can do in terms of actually building speed, since all you can really do is run and jump. The only way that you can really change directions while still maintaining your speed is for the levels to just kinda automatically change directions for you using level elements such as springs or boost pads or something. In Sonic 2 and beyond, 2D Sonic does get the spin dash, which is certainly a step in the correct direction. However, as a movement ability, you can't really use it unless you lose all of your speed, since doing it completely halts your movement. Plus, it isn't exactly the most rapid way to regain your speed. However, it is still something, I suppose. While Sonic is genuinely fun to control, because of his very bare-bones moveset, the developers are extremely limited in how they can expand upon the concept of gaining and maintaining momentum, which is a bit of a problem since, well, games kinda need difficulty curves so that they don't get boring. And because Sonic controls identically to Mario outside of being much more momentum-based, the developers can't really do much to ramp up the difficulty without just being like Mario. And the only way that Sonic can really do anything interesting with its level design is by having a multitude of different intertwining paths for you to take. Now, this does work pretty well for the most part, and when it's done well, it leads to some of the most satisfying levels in gaming history. However, sometimes I do find it can feel a little bit awkwardly stitched together in the worst case scenarios. Finding the best path through a level at times is kinda just noticing a platform in the corner of the screen as it shows up for all of 2 femtoseconds. Sonic desperately feels like he needs something, look, anything at all, to spice up his moves and make his game faster. Literally anything, to let him speed up or slow down or redirect his momentum. Anything at all to give him an extra way to actually engage with some of his levels. Still, the experience that Sonic was going for was pretty good. As I said, it's not perfect, however, Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 are pretty good. Despite these small problems that I think hold it back from being truly amazing, they're pretty good games. And the experience that Sonic was going for was clearly enticing enough for Sonic to become a genuine competitor to Mario. Despite the snags, people absolutely loved Sonic, and, well, so do I. Well, maybe not loved, but I really do like Sonic games. And so, when Mario made the jump to 3D, Sonic followed suit. Now, okay, the jump to 3D is a pretty scary one. At this point in time, outside of a few extremely niche and experimental games, this was uncharted territory. Nobody knew what they were doing at all. So, how did it go? Well, Mario makes the leap into 3D, and what do we get? We get Super Mario 64, one of the greatest video game experiences of all time! A game so amazing that it has single-handedly pioneered 3D games and reshaped the industry as we know it! And how did Sonic do? Oh. Oh no! Oh no! Right, okay. Ignoring the terrible animation and terrible voice acting, Sonic unfortunately continues to fumble in some pretty familiar ways as he jumps into 3D. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 are, okay, well, they're decent games. They have some pretty neat parts, however, I do think that they fall for a lot of the same pitfalls as the 2D Sonic games do. Plus, it also has the whole thing where you gotta, like, okay, some people love these sections, I do not care for the Knuckles finding the gem sections at all. So to have to do those in between the actually fun levels kind of, for me at least, brings the game down. On top of that, this level structure fundamentally doesn't shift too much compared to the original games. It's still mostly just a bunch of intertwining pathways, which can look especially awkward and inorganic at the worst of times. However, it still does work pretty well at the best of times. Sonic Heroes is gimmicky. Sonic 06 is... Okay, come on, I don't really need to tell you about Sonic 06 and why it's terrible. That's pretty low-hanging fruit. But then, we get to the Boost series, which consists of Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors, Sonic Generations, and Sonic Forces. Oh, also Sonic Rush, but like... The Boost series is... Okay, well, it has its issues. Ignoring the bafflingly weird gimmicks that had just no reason to exist ever, like the Werehog, just the Boost Sonic formula itself has a few problems. On paper, yeah, it seems kinda cool. The boost is pretty speedy, and you need to pick and choose when you use your boost based on how many rings or the little goobers that you have. Problem is, the boost effectively removes all of the cool momentum-based platforming that Sonic had back in the 2D era. And, well, Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. Effectively turning Sonic's very dynamic states of speed into two states. Speedy and then... not speedy. The boost, while it may be fast, which is what Sonic is about, is honestly a little bit too fast. Especially because you're getting this level of speed from just a single button press. The transition between this absurdly fast speed and your normal movement is effectively a discontinuous jump as opposed to a smooth transition. You press one button and Sonic is just neum. So it's kind of like impossible to even comprehend what's happening when you're going that fast. Not to mention that just gaining speed like that is a little bit unsatisfying after the first couple times. See, as I've already said, the thing that makes Sonic so much fun isn't actually the super high speeds. It's building up to and maintaining those super high speeds. It's learning the level layout so that you can avoid all of the obstacles that would make you lose your speed. It's why the parts that unavoidably slow you down are so unsatisfying and awkward in my eyes. And the boost games effectively remove basically all of the fun parts of moving fast, and leave nothing behind except for the simple, immediate feeling of catharsis, which is cool at first, but loses its charm without any of the nuance to back it up. And because of how fast Sonic moves with just the press of a button, levels naturally need to kind of just be straight lines that you can neum through without thinking, which is where you get those super boring, brainless highways of Sonic Forces. However, if you don't do this, then the boost is effectively too fast for your level design and feels, well, terrible to use. So you need to just not use the boost, and then the level has these really awful feeling platforming sections that are just slow, which is where you get Sonic Colors, which has way too many sections that are just this. Sonic Unleashed, and to some extent Sonic Generations, do kind of strike a semi-happy balance, but, well, the level design stuff you can actually pull off without running into either of the aforementioned problems is pretty limited. Before I continue, however, I want to be very clear that I don't think the Sonic series is bad, for the most part. I mean, there are some pretty bad games, don't get me wrong, but I do enjoy a lot of his games. Outside of the obvious stinkers, Sonic has some genuinely really well-made parts, where you can just have fun playing a really speedy game. Just search up any speedruns of most Sonic games, and you can see just what Sonic is capable of, and how it can, in fact, be a speedy game. Heck, Sonic Mania even kind of fixes the problem that the original 2D Sonic games were running into, where Sonic just didn't have enough ways to maintain his speed, with the addition of the drop dash. And then there's Ray. Ray is nuts. Ray is... Ray is pretty good. However, there still are very few Sonic games that are truly focused on the vision of speed and mastery-based design. The Sonic Adventure series has the other characters sections, Sonic Unleashed has the Werehog, Sonic Colors and the original Sonic have level design issues, Sonic 2 has difficulty curve issues. I mean, I don't really need to tell you about Sonic Lost World, or the Sonic Boom series. Sonic, at his best, is pretty great, but I think we can do better. Similar to how Mario is usually a pretty basic form of a precision-based platformer, Sonic, at its best, is still a pretty basic form of a speed-based platformer. For Mario, you get games like Celeste or Rayman Origins, which offer more dynamic versions of the kind of platforming that Mario's based around. Interesting evolutions of the basic format that Mario established that elevate the genre. However, Sonic has always just kind of been the most evolved form of the ideas he was going for, which, as we just covered, has quite a few limitations. However, in Sonic's wake, another game eventually emerged, taking the ideas that Sonic established and expanding upon them tenfold to make something that is truly amazing. And that game is Pizza Tower.
Pizza Tower is one of the best platformers, just in general. It's so goddamn good. It's goofy, it's amazing, it's real good. I'm gonna spend the next however long telling you about my analysis of its design, because that's what the YouTube channel is about. Game design and stuff. Heck yeah. Pizza Tower is basically everything I have ever wanted from a Sonic game, and more. It's also just absolutely nuts. First of all, we need to talk about the game's main character, Peppino, and how he moves. Because there are a lot of properties of his moveset that make him particularly satisfying to both control and maintain speed with. I'm gonna go a lot more in depth here compared to what I did with the Sonic games, mainly because here I am only trying to cover a single game as opposed to trying to express mild disappointment with an entire series. Alright, so, first of all, the part of Peppino's controls that is most easily comparable to Sonic, his running. Similar to Sonic, Peppino will speed up the longer he runs uninterrupted in a single direction. The build-up in speed being the central idea is the defining trait that makes Pizza Tower so directly comparable to a Sonic game, because it effectively means that when optimizing your path through a level in Pizza Tower and in Sonic, the central idea is based around not losing the speed that you have built up whenever possible. However, Peppino has a few differences when compared to Sonic that are noteworthy to point out. In the original 2D Sonic games, Sonic's speed is very granular. It's got a smooth curve to it. There aren't discrete jumps in your speed. You smoothly speed up and you smoothly slow down. And Sonic will change running animations based on reaching certain speed thresholds. Obviously, it's technically not a smooth transition between each speed state because, well, infinitely small changes aren't really possible to actively compute, especially on a goddamn Sega Genesis, but that's beside the point. Point is, Sonic is deliberately designed to make it feel like his speed gradually increases and builds. It's a smooth change in his speed. Peppino, however, has 4 very specific speeds that he will switch between, which the game refers to as Mach speeds. And each speed has a very specific animation to make it extremely clear exactly what speed you're going at, which is important for a few reasons that we will get to in a little bit. Functionally, the two systems end up being pretty similar, as you change Mach speeds based on how long you run in a single direction. Heck, Peppino even swaps between Mach speeds faster when you run down in slopes, similar to how you build speed faster when running down slopes in a Sonic game. So, the two systems are reasonably similar and can be easily compared. And with only this information available, neither system is inherently better or worse compared to the other. Besides the fact that Peppino's running animations are just hilarious. As we can see, fundamentally, in a gameplay sense, Sonic and Peppino are both defined primarily by their abilities to build and maintain their momentum. However, unlike Sonic, Peppino has quite a few more tools to work with that enhance and build upon that basic idea. The first thing that really sets Peppino apart and expands upon the concept of building speed is that depending on what Mach speed you're running at, Peppino has new properties. He interacts with parts of the level differently and is able to perform a wider variety of moves that you only have access to when moving at certain Mach speeds or higher. And unlike Sonic, all of these abilities and properties that you gain at higher speeds flow together and are all based around the central idea of letting you maintain your speed. At faster speeds, for example, enemies will start to get scared of the crazed middle-aged Italian pizza chef rapidly approaching their location, and will reasonably freeze in panic. Most enemies will simply cease to attack when you are running fast enough, and at Mach 3 or higher, you kill enemies by simply running into them. Running at faster speeds also allows you to break through different kinds of breakable blocks. At Mach 1, which is just walking speed, walls remain as the oppressive limiters of physical displacement that they are designed to be. However, at Mach 2 you can break through cracked walls, and at Mach 3 you can break through the special metal blocks. Already, this opens up leagues of new possibilities for level design and nuance, and avoids some of the pitfalls that Sonic games tend to fall into. This is what I mean when I say that Pizza Tower is an evolved form of a Sonic game. It takes the basic idea of momentum-based platforming that Sonic introduced, however, it takes that concept an entire layer further. One thing that is really only a minor annoyance in Sonic that I didn't quite mention earlier is the enemies. In Sonic games, simply touching an enemy while you're not rolled up in a ball will cause Sonic to take damage, which, when you are moving so fast that your screen looks like this, can feel a little bit cheap, and is quite frankly a little bit uninteresting. The only purpose enemies really serve in a Sonic game are basically just, well, walking spike walls that you can also roll through. Don't get me wrong, the dynamic of knowing when to be rolling or running in Sonic is actually quite fun. However, since enemies don't really have any way of interacting with Sonic's speed, it significantly limits what kind of a role that they can play in the game. Which is also kind of where later game enemies in Sonic can end up being a little bit annoying, because there aren't really many ways to actually make more difficult enemies for Sonic that are also satisfying enemies for Sonic. In Pizza Tower, however, the enemies, first of all, don't deal contact damage unless they are very clearly spiky, or very clearly holding a pokey object pointed right at your face. And as such, getting damage never really feels cheap, since simply walking into most enemies won't punish you. And because enemies are almost always a non-factor once you reach Mach 3, they are almost exclusively a problem from when you are moving at slow speeds. This means that the enemies themselves act as an encouragement to try to move at faster speeds for longer, as opposed to just being endlessly more annoying the faster you go like Sonic enemies are. Enemies can thus also end up being used as soft speed checks of sorts, invisible time limits that encourage you to try to engage with the level to find ways in order to build up to Mach 3 before you reach the enemies. Or, alternatively, they serve as ways to encourage you to instead maintain your speed into a section that has them in it, subtly challenging players to creatively use Peppino's moveset in order to move at faster speeds through trickier sections. It gets the player thinking. Similarly, the metal blocks would act as hard speed checks, gateways that are simply only passable if you are able to maintain your speed through the level as you approach them, or build up your speed fast enough. Even without considering the possibility of replaying levels to optimize them, the game is already subtly encouraging you to try to learn how to move faster. Being fast is not only really fun, but the game feels like it gives you encouragement to actually keep moving fast, as opposed to having literally every aspect of it trying to slow you back down until you memorize the perfect route through a level. Overall, making the first playthrough of a level slightly less frustrating. And we haven't even gotten to the main thing that makes Peppino so much more dynamic compared to Sonic. Okay, well, you've probably spotted it in the background footage by now, or you've played the game and already know about this, but I haven't directly mentioned it in the video until now. That right there. See that, folks? This is the good stuff. Very much unlike Sonic, Peppino here can actually turn around and then immediately continue running at his previous speed, with one exception that we'll get to in a bit, don't worry. And this one tiny little extra addition to your movement adds literal mountains of extra depth and possibilities. For example, it means level design can kind of wind around on itself more. Things can bend and twist and move back and forth without the game being forced to slow to a crawl or use a bunch of loop-de-loops or automatic sections. It's so much more satisfying, and because Peppino skids around when you try to turn around at faster speeds before he actually successfully turns around, you still need to be careful about timing when you turn around so that you don't run off the sides of platforms. Or don't turn around too soon and then end up in an awkward situation. But wait, there's more! You can intentionally use this little drift that Peppino does to fall off of a platform so that you may continue running fast in a different direction immediately as you touch the ground. Which leads to even more interesting setups that allow the game to make itself harder and more complicated without just making it impossible to go fast. There are so many ways the designers can add extra depth and interesting things to the concept of going fast, and boy do they do that well, but we'll get to that. Once again, I say that a lot, but trust me, we'll get to it. Cause for now, we aren't quite done talking about Peppino's moveset. Oh, no, definitely not. Peppino has so many options for you, and I am going to go through all of them at a semi-rapid pace compared to his running, because I have other things to discuss besides just the controls of the game. This is a video essay about analyzing game design, not a goddamn instruction manual. Well, running at Mach 2 or higher, if you jump at a wall instead of slamming your face into it, you will begin to run up said wall. Jumping off of that wall will allow you to redirect your speed after having moved upwards, however, it will set you back to Mach 2. Running up the wall without jumping off of it, however, will actually count as uninterrupted movement and will continue to build up Peppino's speed to different levels. And if you were running, you kinda just continue running after reaching the top of the wall, so this doesn't slow you down at all. While at Mach 3 or higher, you can hold the up button, which turns Peppino into a pancake. And while this seems to be a really stupid move that doesn't mean anything and ruins your flow, it actually lets you do this. And then, you can press the grab button to do a shoulder bash out of it, which returns you back to Mach 3 immediately. Which means Peppino also has a lot of ways to maintain his speed when moving upwards, and every option has a unique purpose and a unique use case where they are better or worse, such that none of his vertical mobility options invalidate each other. If you have a straight shot up a big wall, doing the normal run uninterrupted is best, so you can just keep moving and building up speed. However, in tighter areas, wall jumping to remain at Mach 2 might be the best so that you actually have time to react to other things. However, if there are no walls, or you want to change directions without going back to Mach 2, you can use the Mega Pancake Jump. Peppino also does have a grab button, which makes him slide forwards like slow, angrily outstretching his hands. And while you're doing this, if you touch an enemy that isn't actively pointing a sharp pokey stick at your face, you grab them and can toss them around, or suplex them, or something, which gives you an option to deal with enemies without moving at Mach 3. However, doing this will completely slow you down. Thus, it doesn't invalidate killing enemies by moving at Mach 3 or higher, because it doesn't maintain your speed. However, if you are at the start of a room or a level and thus are not yet running fast, you can use this to clear out a path for yourself by killing other enemies that might be in the way, making it easier to build up to faster speeds. Pressing the grab button while holding up makes you do this upwards punch thing, which both acts as a double jump and as an attack. However, it will also slow you down, so you need to pick and choose when to use this compared to Peppino's other vertical mobility options in order to maintain as much speed as possible. The little dash Peppino does when you press the grab button has a couple neat properties of its own as well, since it actually heavily interacts with Peppino's momentum. If you jump mid-grab dash, you do a long jump. Grab sliding also scales its distance with your running speed and maintains your speed. Doing the slide dash thing actually also speeds you up from a standstill much faster than just running, at the cost of you needing a little bit of extra space to do it. If you crouch and press the grab button, you will do this goofy little belly slide, which will transition you straight into Mach 3, giving you options to speed back up rapidly if necessary. However, doing so is tricky since you are extremely vulnerable to attack while doing so, and you also need enough space to pull it off, and also need to press a semi-rapid combination of buttons. Speaking of holding down, you can crouch, and if you crouch while running, you will roll, which lets you squeeze under smaller spaces, but it makes you vulnerable to attack until you resume your previous running speed after finishing. Press down midair while you aren't running and you do a belly slam, which lets you break cracked blocks and kill enemies from above. However, it does lose you all of your speed, unless you land on a slope, in which case you will gain all of your speed back as long as you continue running. And if you do a belly slam from high enough up, you burn up the atmosphere and then can break the metal blocks, and then transition into an even faster speed once you land on a slope. However, if you are currently running while you press down in midair, instead of ground slamming, you do this little diagonal dive thing, which doesn't break blocks or kill enemies, but it does carry your speed, so you can use it to carefully squeeze through gaps you wouldn't otherwise be able to make it through because of your speed. And most importantly of all, you press the taunt button, and Peppino strikes a fancy pose. Does this need any actual functionality? Obviously not. It's a pose button. What else would you want it to do? It also maintains your speed, so you can just... like, come on, what more you could ask for? A parry? Well, you're in luck because taunting is also a parry. With very careful timing, you can deal with enemies that are actively attacking you while you are still below Mach 3. It is difficult to pull off, however, and requires a lot of skill to do so successfully, but it feels oh so satisfying when you do. Maintain a combo for long enough and Peppino will be able to perform a super taunt, which is basically just a screen nuke. It ends up being a really fun resource to save and manage to use at just the right spot to completely avoid what would otherwise be a kind of bleh slow section with a lot of enemies, rewarding you for carefully planning and maintaining a high combo. I haven't actually explained the combo system yet, but don't worry, I'll get to that. I'll get to it. Because there's still one more thing to talk about here. If you hold down the taunt button, if you hold it down, wonderful. This game is just bonkers and I love it. Anyway, all of these unique moves that Peppino can pull off overall means that the action of actually building up and maintaining your speed can take extremely different forms depending on the level. You can do crazy loops around rooms, switchbacks, carefully chaining slides and belly slams together so you don't actually ever stop moving. The levels of the game are able to take so many new and unique shapes because of this. The structures of the environments that you need to traverse, the platform part of the platforming game can take so many different shapes and patterns, and can lead to an absurd amount of variety in the game without even needing to add in extra little gimmicks or werehogs or stupid gem hunt sections or anything. The developers molding the levels in ways that would make any Sonic game slow down to a painful crawl does nothing but make you think even more about how you can traverse the room in a faster way in Pizza Tower. Now, this isn't to say that building up to and maintaining the fastest speeds isn't nearly as impactful or special as it is in Sonic. See, Mach 4, Peppino's fastest running speed, actually has a couple very special differences to the other three speed states that set it apart. First of all, Mach 4 cannot be maintained when turning around. If you try to turn around, you will be set back to Mach 3. Mach 4 is also the only running state that can only be achieved through running. There's no moves that you can do to get right to Mach 4 immediately. On top of this, the only actions that won't slow you down are wall running, jumping, grab, dashing, taunting, and the diagonal dive thing, which allows Mach 4 to be this sort of special state that you need to come up with very specific strategies to reach and maintain, while also allowing the other running speeds to be reached and maintained a lot easier, so that going super fast can both feel not nearly as impossible and still be a special state to achieve. Okay, unfortunately such a complex moveset does have a few problems with it. Namely, it's much harder for newer players to pick up, understand, and most importantly, remember. There are all of these really neat, cool things you can do as Peppino, but, well, it can kind of be a lot for players to remember all of these things. And unfortunately, Pizza Tower introduces these moves with a less than satisfying tutorial that doesn't feel like as natural of a learning environment as Green Hill Zone in Sonic. However, overall, I think the more complicated moveset is a net positive for the game, because the amount of layers of depth and mastery that can be achieved through chaining Peppino's moves together just absolutely eclipses what you can do in most Sonic games. However, an amazing moveset doesn't really matter much if the levels themselves don't support it and aren't built around allowing you to express yourself with it. Remember, one of the main problems holding most Sonic games back besides his simplistic moveset actually boils down to the level design as opposed to just the controls of Sonic himself. While Sonic's simplistic moveset does severely limit what his levels are capable of looking like, one of the actual problems is that the developers of Sonic often designed sections of levels that were bizarrely unaccommodating for Sonic's movement. A brilliant set of controls is only the foundation of a good platforming game, because running around in an empty space having fun with moves is only engaging for so long, which is why levels absolutely need to be designed around encouraging and enhancing your moveset. With more precision-based platformers like Mario or Celeste, I mention them a lot, but they're good examples, shush, it's a lot easier to do this. Mario and Madeline are so versatile with how they control that they can be satisfying in a vast majority of contexts. The only times that Mario games really feel awful to play are when they don't let you play as Mario and instead have weird, awkward water controls or Spring Mario. And with Celeste, well, I've played a lot of modded Celeste levels, and as such, I have seen Celeste be twisted into ungodly forms. And despite this, even the truly bad Celeste levels, most of the time can still manage to be fun because of how satisfyingly Madeline controls. However, for characters like Sonic or Peppino, where learning to maintain control over your character and not spiral into chaos is paramount, levels need to be designed specifically around them, otherwise you get garbage like Labyrinth Zone or Marble Zone, stuff that just feels like it's supposed to be in a different game. It's kind of like why the Blue Shell and the Mega Mushroom don't really work very well in New Super Mario Bros. For the DS, because all of the levels feel kind of awkward when you're trying to use these new bizarre movesets and sizes in them. So, now the question is raised. Do the levels of Pizza Tower properly accommodate Mr. Peppino Spaghetti and his speedy shenanigans? Well, let's take a look. Okay, so before we go into how individual levels and level segments manage to encourage speedy play, we need to go over the basic level design pattern that most levels tend to follow, because the overall basic template that a Pizza Tower level follows already does a lot to encourage you to work towards moving faster. First of all, we have the obvious score system. Collecting various things within the level, like the pizza toppings and rescuing the little goobers stuck in cages, will award you with points. The more points you get, the better your rank is, ranging from D rank to S rank. Taking damage of any kind will also lower your score by a considerable amount, so skillful play is encouraged. When you manage to beat the level, your rank that you got is displayed to you by Peppino himself. And while getting good ranks isn't absolutely necessary to finishing the game, getting the bad ranks doesn't exactly make you feel the best about yourself. This is a pretty standard system in games. Scores and ranks are generally really engaging ways to encourage mastery. It's basically the entire foundation behind what makes rhythm games so engaging. However, in Pizza Tower, the ranks tend to feel just that much more impactful because reaching high ranks is basically the only form of challenge in the game. See, outside of exactly one case that we will get to in a bit, Peppino can't actually die in normal levels. Enemies and hazards cannot force you to restart the entire level from scratch. Pizza Tower, if played exclusively by only beating each level once and just getting to the end of the game, is an extremely easy experience. The entire meat of the game revolves around mastering the levels and Peppino's movement, and executing a near-perfect run to get higher ranks. This means that the enemies serve as more of an obstacle to your score as opposed to a direct threat to Peppino's bones. Getting damaged ruins your speed and makes you lose points, but that wouldn't be too big of a deal if it weren't for another system that Pizza Tower uses. The combo system. Killing enemies in Pizza Tower adds 1 to your overall combo. After an enemy is killed, the game starts a timer, and if you don't kill another enemy before the end of said timer, your combo resets and you are awarded points based on how big your combo was. The combo meter, which is displayed very clearly up on the top right corner of the screen, right under the infinitely helpful live Peppino reaction monitor, is one of the major things that encourages you to keep moving. Because in order to maintain a combo, you need to be moving through a level at a fast enough pace that you can keep running into enemies and killing them. Taking any form of damage causes you to lose a huge chunk of time, and it makes it significantly harder to maintain your combo when moving from enemy to enemy. However, collecting anything that raises your score will add to the timer proportionally based on how many points it was worth, which means if you are going for a high combo, you often also need to weave the various collectibles into your route to make sure that you can maintain the combo. The combo meter, as we can see, is a very solid way to get the players to move a little bit faster. However, just in case you don't want to have any fun at all and ignore the combo meter, every level has a second phase to it that actively forces you to try to step on the gas and get moving. See, unlike a lot of platformers, the level structure of Pizza Tower isn't just about going from point A to point B, and then calling it a day. In every level, you are first looking to find your good old pal Pillar John so you can kick his shins in. Pillar John, being a load-bearing pillar that is necessary for the structural integrity of the entire tower, causes things to get a little bit unstable when you beat him up. You have now activated Pizza Time. Suddenly, you are given a timer, and now must travel back the way that you came and make it all the way back to the start of the level. Thus, the levels, instead of being based around you going from point A to point B, see you going from point A to point B and then back to point A, as you now must frantically make your escape back through the rooms you already traversed. But this time you actually need to be moving fast, because if you run out of time, the game's main villain, Pizza Face, shows up and begins to chase you down. Pizza Face is the only thing that can actually kill you in most of the levels, and you need to go all the way back to the start of a level if he catches you. So ideally, you want to avoid having him show up. Though it is a little bit more lenient than just having a hard time limit that simply kills you at the end of it, because if you were getting close, you can still manage to weave your way around Pizza Face long enough to make it out as long as you're skilled. Going through all of the rooms backwards seems kinda tedious at first, however moving backward while also at a fast rate changes the context of the once familiar rooms. And because of your familiarity with the rooms, you will naturally have an easier time navigating them while on a time limit. Pizza Tower, however, also implements a couple of other mechanics in order to spice things up further. Beginning Pizza Time will also activate a new set of collectibles for you to grab if you want even more points. Doing so is highly advised because Pizza Time also activates a constant point decay, which is effectively its own secondary invisible timer for those who want better scores. Plus, if you make it back to the door fast enough, you can strike poses to get extra points because of how speedy you were. Additionally, Pizza Time will also cause entirely unique enemies to appear. This, combined with the new collectible point sources, also means that you aren't just running through big, empty rooms. Also, Pizza Time will often physically change the shape of the rooms. These special John blocks will swap between physical and just kind of being there once Pizza Time starts, which can drastically shake up rooms and in some cases will often force you to take detours, usually briefly setting you on a short chain of entirely new rooms that you now must use your skills to react to on the fly. The degree to which the Pizza Time path overlaps with the normal path varies an awful lot depending on the level, and leads to a lot of variety between levels based on the path you take. So, instead of every level being just a straight line from point A to point B and then back to point A, the path from point B back to point A frequently loops around in its own ways. Harder levels often have much more new rooms compared to easier ones, as the game expects you to have a much deeper understanding of Peppino and how to control him, whereas easier levels tend to overlap with the main path much more frequently. The basic overall structure of a level leaves a lot of room for interesting variation, even without considering the actual level mechanics and room layouts. And it means that coming up with a new route for every single level, if you want to optimize your path through it, adds an entire new layer of nuance to consider. Every single level also will always have a consistent set of special collectibles. Every single level has 5 of these little munchkins, which are called toppins. The toppins, who are initially trapped in cages, will give massive point boosts to people who collect them. These guys are the easiest of the different special collectibles to gather, as they are actually necessary for progressing through the game because of the cash that they reward you when you lead them to the end of a level. As such, toppins are usually barely off the beaten path, and are typically really easy to find. However, they can require you to make some trickier jumps or more carefully consider your routing to actually reach them. Every level also has these 3 secret eyeball portals, which is where you find... I don't really know what's going on with these guys, but they do exist, and they give you a lot of points. However, you don't just go through the secret portal and collect these guys. The secret portals will lead you to these little bonus gauntlets that are usually a bit of a step up in difficulty from the rest of the level as a reward for players who really know what they're doing. If you enter one of these during pizza time, the pizza time countdown will pause until you exit. However, your combo timer will not, which is important because some of these secret gauntlets are only reachable during pizza time. So, you don't need to worry about taking a second or two to clear these on your first time through. However, if you're going for a good score and want to maintain a higher combo, you still need to be beating them fast. And finally, hidden behind a special locked door, every level houses a super secret ultimate treasure, which is, well, it's just food, but they are worth a lot of points, and the game displays them on these pedestals outside the levels in the hub world, so they are definitely really cool. Anyway, the only way to get these is to go bother the tower's janitor, Jerome, and get him to open the door for you. Both Jerome and the door are often not as simple to collect and reach as the toppins are, so accounting for grabbing them adds extra challenge to the level, similar to the special gauntlets. While it is technically just one collectible, obtaining it is split up into 2 steps, finding Jerome and reaching the door, which can heavily affect how you end up approaching trying to grab him, because collecting him and bringing him to his door efficiently requires an extra layer of thinking. However, why exactly this is doesn't quite make sense to talk about just yet, so for now, keep this information in the back of your mind, and we'll come back to Jerome and the secret little treasure in a bit. This next bit of information I'm about to tell you doesn't really add anything to the analysis, however, it's an amazing detail, and this is my video. And because it's my video, it is crucially important that you know about this. And now that I have mentioned both the toppins and Jerome, it can finally have complete context. When you strike a pose, all of the toppins that are following you, as well as Jerome, will also strike a pose. This is so adorable! Anyway, back to the useful information. Continuing on, all of this interesting depth when it comes to routing through levels comes without even considering individual room layouts and level mechanics. Just the basic template already sets up every single level with some incredibly enticing incentives for you to come back to them and replay them. However, the ultimate thing that makes Pizza Tower truly brilliant is that I lied about the ranking system. The final rank isn't an S rank. The best rank you can actually get is the elusive P rank, which obviously stands for Pizza Rank. However, unlike getting the other ranks, a P rank requires a couple of extra conditions to be met, which elevates the experience a little bit beyond just getting a good score. P ranks actually completely transform the way that you need to approach and think about a level, and going for them is probably one of the most fun parts of the game. First of all, in order to get a P rank, you need to reach the score requirement for an S rank, which requires pretty good knowledge of the level. You need to minimize how much you get hit, and you need to collect most of the point sources that are found in the level, as well as make it through pizza time as fast as you possibly can to minimize how many points you lose. Secondly, you need to collect all 3 of the secrets, as well as the tower secret treasure. And then, the part that really takes getting a P rank above and beyond the other ones. You need to start a combo in the very first room of the level, and then maintain said combo throughout the entirety of the level. And just like that, the entire level transforms, as you now need to not only be constantly moving, but you also need to be taking a path that collects all of the point sources as well as necessary collectibles as efficiently as possible. It is a constant race against the timer that resets your combo. However, getting a P rank isn't just as simple as clearing out an entire room the first time you go through it. Oh, no. You need to leave yourself a clear path of collectibles and enemies for the run back to the entrance door at the end of the level. Getting a P rank asks you to not only understand the level, but master it. Knowing all of the rooms, all of the ways to save time, and all of the most efficient paths to take to make sure your combo doesn't break. And after completing the extremely exhilarating task of making it to Pillar John, getting all the secrets, finding Jerome, and bringing him to his door, and then finally making the run back during pizza time, you find out that I lied about the requirements. You actually also need to complete a Lap 2 by going through this newly opened magic pizza portal, which resets all of the Pizza Time specific enemies and collectibles, and puts you back where Pillar John was, forcing you to make the Pizza Time run back a second time! Which, of course, means that your route through Pizza Time needs to be extremely efficient, because you now only have half the time you previously had to complete Pizza Time, since you now need to do it twice. This game is absolutely insane, and the extra context that Pizza Time adds to a level elevates the mechanical understanding required to an extreme extent, as you legitimately need to have a near-flawless plan to make it through the level in order to keep your combo up the whole time. You need to consider a lot of very interesting things when planning a P-rank route. Your path through a room, whether or not you leave certain collectibles behind at the start because they would be perfect to grab on the way back during pizza time. Like, for example, take the very first room of the level Pizzascape, where it's actually more efficient to grab this top-in in the center of the room on your way back through it during pizza time, because it sets you up perfectly for both the Lap 2 portal and the level exit. The already potentially varied level structure that Pizza Tower has only becomes even more interesting, as the secrets as well as the tower treasure and Jerome effectively add a points C through F in between your trip from point A to point B and then back to point A. And the thing that makes them so much more interesting in this context is that you need to figure out the best way to collect the extra stuff in order to be efficient. There's not a guaranteed order to it. You need to reach the secrets at a time where your route takes you close enough to them that you won't lose your combo getting them. And you basically need to complete the secret gauntlets on your first try, otherwise you are almost guaranteed to lose your combo and be forced to restart. Using the level Pizzascape as an example again, Jerome and the tower treasure are even more interesting now that you have to do a P rank, because normally, you could always just grab Jerome and then immediately take him to his door. The important thing here, though, is that he is found only a couple of rooms away from where Pillar John is located. His door, however, is located all the way back here. If you're going for a P rank, you simply do not have enough time to grab him and bring him to the door right now, because all of the enemies between you and the door are probably dead. And even if they aren't, and you somehow manage to not break your combo getting back to the door, you still need to then go all the way back past where you just grabbed Jerome in the first place, since that's where Pillar John is. So, if you just start pizza time after grabbing Jerome, you'll be able to easily bring him back to his door during pizza time because of the extra point sources and enemies. However, doing so necessarily eats up some time during pizza time, so you now have to move just a little bit faster to make up for your detour. My absolute favorite example of how Jerome and the tower treasure can really spice up how you approach a level is in Blood Sauce Dungeon. This time, Jerome is near the very start of the level, but he's in this really awkward to reach area that also happens to be directly on your path back through the level during pizza time. However, his door is very close to Pillar John, so what you can do is just ignore both of them for now, and then grab Jerome during pizza time on your way back up. And because if you're doing a pizza rank, you're going to be doing a second lap, you can just bring Jerome back around to his door using the Lap 2 portal. It brings him right there. I find this extremely cool and dynamic, with how all of these elements can come together to create so many possible varieties of the same basic level structure that can ask you to change how you think about your routing and strategy, which is something that Sonic in some of his games kind of struggles to do. Speaking of, we still need to talk about how the individual rooms themselves tend to be laid out, because even if Peppino's controls are amazing and the ideas for the levels are amazing on a macro scale, the individual parts of a level still need to be designed around encouraging Peppino's moveset, and for the most part, they are. There are very few times in Pizza Tower where you find unavoidable snags that just slow the game down. And when you do manage to find a spot like that, 9 times out of 10 you can still actually manage to maintain a sense of flow through said sections if you take some time to understand the shape of the room and how you can use your moveset to traverse it. Take these series of rooms in the game's very first level, John Gutter for example. It's a very simple example, but if I focus on literally every part of the game that's like this, we will be here for actual hours. So, for now I want to just focus on this one little part that's at the beginning of the game to really demonstrate what I'm talking about. So, pretty early on into the level, you are presented with this really long spread out room with rows of enemies and metal blocks, and only a few jumps that you need to make. This room is basically designed to be really easy to build up to Mach 4 in, probably the first time you're going to be doing it in the game. It's meant to basically get you excited about going fast without doing much to make you work for it. The plethora of fork guys encourages you to be moving fast, and this metal block ensures that you need to have made it to at least Mach 3. And beyond that, you kind of just go nuts. It's a fun but simple room, however immediately afterwards, all of that momentum comes to a screeching halt as you slam face first into this wall. And then, oh no, you gotta break this metal block with a belly slam, so you then need to climb the ladder to get in the height for it, and climbing the ladder is really slow. And then after you do that, this fork guy is probably going to be foiling your plans of trying to build up to Mach 3 unless you're really lucky. Upon first glance, this is a classic Sonic-style blunder, where the game slaps you on the wrist and says, no, you don't get to have fun anymore. It's slow, it feels awkward, and to make matters worse, it comes right after a room that is designed to let you easily reach the fastest running speed, so the whiplash you feel is only further highlighted. However, this room isn't actually an unavoidable snag at all. You can still be fast through this part, but the game is now asking you to be smart about it. On your next time through the level, you can remember the immediate wall and jump as you enter the room, which will land you on the adjacent wall. And since you were running at Mach 4, you will now very quickly ascend the wall at the Mach 4 speed, soon slamming your head into the ceiling. Which, oh no, you lose all your speed. However, slamming your head into the ceiling means you aren't running anymore. So, you can chain this directly into a belly slam, and while you're not going to be landing on a slope to let you immediately regain your speed, clever players might realize they have just enough room for the belly slide, which then transitions them straight back into Mach 3, potentially immediately and seamlessly if they time it well, allowing them to clear the rest of the room incredibly quickly. This is the kind of thing that makes Pizza Tower so amazing. The way you need to analyze the structure of the level you find yourself in to then use your movement in a clever way so that you can make it through fast. And basically every single level's like this. The only one that is a true stinker happens to also be named Oh Shit, and takes place in a sewer, which I find to be a very comedic coincidence. Because of all of the neat things that Peppino can do and all of the ways that Peppino can move, the designers are able to give every single level a very distinct and unique flow and shape. Once again, take the level Bloodsauce Dungeon for example. Bloodsauce Dungeon is an almost entirely vertical level. The trip to Pillar John sees you descending the level where you need to be making tight turns and well-timed dives to avoid accidentally running back up a wall to the top of the rooms, or just running into a wall in general. Then, Pizza Time completely flips the script, and now you must climb up the entire level, figuring out good times to use the wall run or the super jump. And Bloodsauce Dungeon happens to be one of the levels where the Pizza Time route is basically exactly the same as the normal route, as it of a couple sections. However, this works perfectly fine and isn't repetitive, because moving back up the rooms now completely changes the context of them. Now, alright. As we can see, the level structure of Pizza Time allows for some pretty interesting setups. However, much like Sonic games, Pizza Tower also employs the use of level gimmicks, and as we've seen in Sonic, that can kind of be a dangerous thing to do if you're not very good at designing video games. But thankfully, in Pizza Tower, the level-specific mechanics and gimmicks, for the most part, serve only to enhance the central idea of going fast instead of hindering it. Because of this, the later levels of the game are able to challenge you in a way that is very unique to Peppino and how he moves, instead of just, well, I mean, you've seen later levels of Sonic games. Before I can really discuss why the level-specific mechanics, for the most part, are incredibly well implemented in Pizza Tower, we first need to cover what exactly makes for a well-made stage mechanic. In any platformer game, levels made entirely out of nothing but walls, floors, and spikes, with maybe a few enemies sprinkled around here and there, can only get you so far. Depending on how varied your character's moveset is, you can maybe get away with making things still feel interesting for a little while. However, most platformers tend to like to continually introduce new ideas and mechanics that put twists on the gameplay and might make you consider aspects aspects of the game a little bit differently. Just for clarity's sake, when I talk about level-specific gimmicks or mechanics, I'm specifically referring to any sort of element that adds extra properties beyond just being a platform. This can sometimes include unique enemies, however it's usually something more like the traffic blocks from Celeste, which add a unique dynamic in the level that you cannot achieve without its existence. Ideally, a level gimmick should work with the game's base mechanics and enhance them or allow them to be seen in a new light. That way, they feel satisfying and natural to interact with as opposed to just flat out being annoying. Now, for an example, I'm going to be talking about Mario games. Mario games are extremely good at having a lot of different stage mechanics. Just an absurd quantity of them. Not necessarily good ones, but they do usually have a lot of them. Which means that the Mario games are a pretty good place to start when trying to analyze good and bad examples of stage mechanics. Mario games are typically centered around precise, responsive controls, and his 2D games specifically don't really give him many options beyond jumping and running when it comes to movement. So, for a Mario stage gimmick to be good, it needs to elevate the concept of timing your jumps. Something like the adorable little fireball dudes that jump up and down out of lava are a good example of a good stage mechanic. They add an extra, usually non-killable obstacle that will temporarily block your path, which encourages you to need to put a little bit of extra thought into the timing of your jumps so that you don't collide with the fireballs. Now, these are a very simple mechanic, but their simplicity, I think, makes them a good place to start here, because some Mario games have gimmicks that get kind of bonkers. Some of the Mario games feature things like these logs, which will slowly roll you off of them if you're grounded on them. Suddenly, you have sections of ground where you are no longer able to stay on the ground for more than a few moments. Hence, the rolling log platforms are able to add a unique twist to the standard formula. You got fun things like bone roller coasters, there's a lot of stuff. I could actually go on for a while, but this is a Pizza Tower video, not a Mario video, so onto some bad examples. Dark levels are a notoriously hated subset of Mario levels, and for a pretty good reason too, as the whole idea of them is that you just can't see anything outside of some very specific areas where the developers decided to allow you to see. What this is effectively doing is just removing your ability to properly determine your timing by, well, obscuring the level. Some dark levels will give you things like the Fire Flower, which you can then use to light up your path, which makes it a bit more interesting. However, because the Fire Flower is a temporary power-up, you can end up in situations where you're stuck without it, and then, well, yeah. Without the context of the Fire Flower, the dark levels are basically just the same as Nintendo sending an employee over to stand in front of your TV screen so that you can only see the very edges of the screen, and then must determine what the level looks like beyond that. The Castle of World 2 in New Super Mario Bros. Wii is literally just a little Timmy pick the right door game. The gimmick here is literally just memorizing the correct sequence of paths to take. It doesn't matter how good at jumping you are, or how good at timing things you are, you just kinda have to cross your fingers and hope. It kind of actively goes against the core ideas that make Mario interesting. A personal least favorite Mario mechanic is the moving snake blocks, which are erratically changing, moving platforms that often do not at all telegraph where they are going to be going. So, you once again just kinda have to react to things in an awkward way without any way to plan ahead, or just memorize it, both of which aren't really that interesting. Now, this isn't a perfect criteria because by this definition, technically water levels are a good mechanic, which is why I need to define a slight extra parameter. Water levels are notorious because they basically just completely twist the game into something unrecognizable. It's a jarring and awkward, abrupt shift into what's effectively a completely different game. It does change how you need to think about the game, but it does it to such an extreme extent that the game becomes almost unrecognizable from a gameplay standpoint. The twist that the mechanic provides is so harsh that it completely blindsides the player, to the point that it is no longer a twist on the standard gameplay and is instead just a new set of gameplay mechanics entirely. However, not every water level is technically bad. Take the beach levels, for example, where only part of the level is submerged in water, and thus you are not forced to deal with different controls for more than a short period of time. The water then becomes a dynamic obstacle that is both very difficult to avoid, but doesn't lead to an instant death, as you still have the opportunity to leave the water or mitigate the awkwardness of the water controls with power-ups. It's an extra challenge for you to overcome using your pre-existing knowledge of the game instead of just being a new game. Moving on, with this baseline for what makes a good stage mechanic, it's pretty easy to see why a lot of Sonic games end up failing in this regard. The moving platforms of various different styles fundamentally are just a thing where you have to sit down and wait, which does not at all enhance or work with the idea of momentum-based speedy platforming. It actually just forces you to stop and wait for things to happen, this is not what you want to do. The only way to go fast is to just not engage with them in the first place if it's possible. There is literally no reason to do the whole slot machine gimmick in Casino Night Zone. It's a cute little moment, and it fits the theme of the level, but it's literally just a thing that stops you in your tracks and makes you wait for a slot machine. It does have the possibility to give you rings, but this does not add anything from the gameplay. In fact, it pauses the game, makes you watch a little cutscene, and then lets you play again. Funnily enough, in concept, underwater sections are one of Sonic's better stage mechanic ideas. It's just unfortunate that oftentimes it isn't used very well. The oxygen mechanic for underwater sections in Sonic is overall meant to be a thing that encourages you to go faster and pick more efficient paths so that you can make it from oxygen bubble to oxygen bubble, or just make it out of the water altogether before you drown. It's just a shame that oxygen bubbles make you sit there in one spot to wait for them to spawn in if you catch a bad time during a cycle. Now that we have our basic definition out of the way, we can talk about Pizza Tower stage mechanics, and for the most part, Pizza Tower does an absolutely amazing job at doing stage mechanics. Just absolutely amazing. However, it would be unfair of me to not mention the couple stinkers that it has. These bombs that appear a couple times remove all of your fun movement abilities beyond jumping and walking. Thus, most sections involving them are really just slow, unavoidable snags because there's nothing you can do to speed them up in clever ways beyond just doing the short platforming section. The penny pinchers are awkward and don't carry your momentum. The cheese blob mode, which is a power-up actually. Cheese blob mode is a Sonic-level catastrophic failure. There is literally only one spot in the game where these mechanics actually kind of work, and it's this secret room right here. The rat balloons in Pig City, where you just hold onto them and slowly rise, are just, why would you even bother interacting with these? Literally just use a super jump. Oh, and like little like propeller ladders in Fun Farm. Once again, what's the point of these? You have vertical mobility options. Oh, right. Ladders. Okay. Ladders aren't technically a unique stage mechanic, they're a thing that shows up in a lot of levels, but oh my god. If you want to know what I think is the worst part of Pizza Tower, it is the ladders. The ladders have literally no reason to exist because of how much vertical mobility Peppino has. And in the rare cases when you actually need to climb down one to progress, which happens almost exclusively in the same level as Cheese Blob mode and the Penny Pinchers, it slows things down to a crawl in a way that literally nothing else does in the game. It is baffling. It is a baffling game. This is a Sonic level catastrophe. Anyway, those are some of the worst ones. Pizza Tower is mostly filled to the brim with really interesting level mechanics that actually add twists to how you might typically approach a given section of a level, and drastically alter your routing decisions in unique ways. I'm showing off a lot of really good examples in the background footage. Some of these I will touch upon again a little bit more later in the video, but once again, if I were to just sit here and list off literally every single good level mechanic, the video would be way too long for poor old me to be able to reasonably complete, since this is just my first video. Anyway, for now, I'll just focus on a couple of my favorite level mechanics that I feel do the best job at representing how clever the design of the game is, because in any other game, the level designed around these would probably suck. And one of those mechanics is golf. Golf. Yes, golf. It's golf. You play golf. This summer, prepare to golf. Golf is one of the best levels in the entire game, which is extra funny because it was originally an April Fool's joke that eventually got expanded into an entire level of its own. Golf centers around this little fella here named Greaseball. If you grab Greaseball, then you get to hit him with a golf club and your stroke count goes up by 1. Cool, that seems really annoying. Let's just go to the end of the room. Ah, shoot. You gotta play golf in golf, go figure. Upon first glance, this seems to be shaping up to be a really annoying level. This just seems like the ultimate terrible level mechanic, right? You're forced to slow down and just play golf. It doesn't encourage fun gameplay at all. You're just playing golf! You're just playing golf! Except, whoops, you can move Greaseball with nearly all of your other moves. And interacting with Greaseball adds to the combo timer, allowing you to maintain a combo as long as you're interacting with Greaseball. This is extremely interesting because the game is still asking you to come up with an efficient way to chain your moves together. However, now you're not only just trying to get yourself through a given space, but Greaseball as well. And you're gonna want to be doing it in as few strokes as possible, because the better you perform on a course, the better of a point reward you get. The elusive Primo Burger, a staple of the sport, being the highest possible reward, and when going for a P rank, you want to get as many Primo Burgers as possible. The level also features big sniffers that will sniff up your ball and hold it in place. This is, of course, a classic golf moment that anybody familiar with the sport will immediately recognize. Now, these are important because they allow for the individual rooms to be broken up into smaller chunks so that Greaseball ends up being a little bit less chaotic, making setups for your movement feel a little bit more consistent and satisfying. Golf overall ends up being an extremely well-made mechanic. You have to entirely change how you think about the game, without just making it so different that it no longer resembles Pizza Tower. So, your pre-existing knowledge of the game will still help. However, you need to also use that knowledge in a very new context, thus making it an interesting and engaging twist. It isn't perfect. There are one or two spots in the level that kind of just actually suck. This secret room in specific, this mechanic was so good. What were you thinking? What were you thinking, developers? But other than that, it is a beautiful recontextualizing of the game's mechanics to add challenge and complexity for where it is in the game. The other specific level that I wanted to talk about is called Don't Make a Sound, which is, no, it's actually a very subtle, blink and you'll miss it reference to the hit horror game series Five Nights at Freddy's. I know it's a little bit of a subtle, like it's a little bit esoteric, but you know, it's a very deep-cut reference, though. Not sure if anybody would actually get it. It's a good thing I was here to explain it. Anyway, while the main mechanic of golf changed how you need to think about your base movement, Don't Make a Sound changes how you need to think about and interact with the enemies. In every room of this level, you can find the deactivated animatronic performers slumped over, deflated, lifeless. You are at the pizzeria after dark, and the enemies, except for these guys, I don't really know what these guys are, but they're in like 3 rooms at a level, and they just kind of bounce around, I guess. Anyway, the enemies are the security guards, wandering the empty halls, flashlights illuminating the darkness as they search for intruders or otherwise suspicious activity. In Don't Make a Sound, you need to, well, not make a sound, because being seen by one of the guards will cause a countdown to start for that enemy. And if you don't defeat the enemy before the end of the countdown, the enemy will sound the alarms. And the previously lifeless animatronic performers will suddenly rise from their slumber and give chase. And if they catch you, well, you might not have been able to spot this, but this is actually a very subtle nod. Essentially, this means that you do not have the option to dawdle when it comes to dealing with the enemies. And if they can be found in arrangements and patterns that lead you to naturally alerting every single one of them as you take them down, you need to absolutely make sure that you can either make it to the end of the room before the alarms sound, or make sure you can path through the room in such a way that you can naturally take them down while keeping things quiet. But the interesting depth of this level doesn't end there. Oh no. These special doors will only open when the alarms are active, and the only way to pass these electric plug blocks is to lure an animatronic through them. So, some rooms will require you to actually activate the animatronics so that you can progress, which means that you need to either be moving fast or be capable of finding clever routes through rooms so that you can work around the animatronics. Not only that, but as the level progresses, the animatronics will get harder and harder. Mushroom Man is fast, but he can't climb walls or otherwise deal with the player being above him or squeezing into tight spaces. However, Mushroom Man is quickly replaced by Cheese Blob Guy, whose squishy nature lets him sneak through the tight spaces. And his sticky body lets him stick to both floors and ceilings, meaning he can actually continue to give chase to the player. Then you get the Ice Cream Puppet. Okay, so, I realized after the fact that, it probably wasn't ice cream, actually, because all of the animatronics represent the toppings, so this is probably actually a tomato. Anyway, whose strings allow them to just fly and pass through walls, I guess. Meaning, you need to be fast enough to outpace the shortcuts it can and will take if it's active. Finally, the Butcher. And while the Butcher is basically just Mushroom Man with ice physics, you need to use his slippery movement for him to clear a path for you. Okay, there's also Pineapple Guy, but Pineapple Guy just kind of chills out and then, during pizza time, spawns in a little munchers for you. The mechanic of the level is another way to require the player to try to move fast and efficiently, even outside of pizza time. And another thing is that this level is pretty close to the end of the game, which means that such an intense requirement for moving fast makes perfect sense, because you're supposed to be capable of doing this by now. And one thing you might be thinking is that, wow, the skills that you need to successfully navigate this level sound a lot like the skills that you need in order to get a P rank, and you would be absolutely correct. This level is actually part of the final culmination of the entire game's effort to get you used to how you need to think about levels when going for a P rank as you just go through them normally. It's a whole really unique approach to the difficulty curve of the game that avoids the same pitfalls a lot of Sonic games fall into, but I'll get into that a little bit later in the video, because this level also has a second mechanic that it introduces, which serves as a perfect segue into one last thing I need to talk about when it comes to Pizza Tower's level-specific gimmicks. Power-ups. Right, I already kind of cheated and talked about a power-up. Pizza Blob mode count as a power-up, but this was a better segue, so we're going with this. Power-ups are, for the purposes of this video, going to be defined as any sort of state that the game puts you in which expands upon and or removes from the player's base moveset. And, much like normal level gimmicks, Mario does a great job at showing us what both good and bad power-ups look like. Things like the propeller hat and the cat suit or the squirrel suit or the tanuki suit are all fan-favorite Mario power-ups because they expand upon Mario's platforming capabilities in an interesting way. Whereas, people don't particularly enjoy Spring Mario from Mario Galaxy because it does a little bit too much to remove from Mario's abilities. And Pizza Tower, as a matter of fact, features a lot of different level-specific power-ups or gimmicks that alter the moveset of the game. And well, okay, a lot of them are really good, but I gotta be honest, the power-ups, aside from the ladders, are probably most consistently the worst parts of Pizza Tower. And the perfect power-up to start with that effectively demonstrates both how Pizza Tower succeeds and fumbles a little with its power-ups is the one that you get in Don't Make a Sound, which is a shotgun! You get it just before pizza time in the level Don't Make a Sound. Peppino did what everybody joked that the protagonist of the FNAF series should have done since the beginning. It's amazing. Anyway, the shotgun. I mean, what else is there to explain? It's a shotgun. Gun go boom, enemy go dead. It's a very simple addition to your moveset, and it has a couple properties that make it both good in some aspects as well as, well, a little annoying to use. Namely, the shotgun slows you down when you fire it, which does end up making it unsatisfying to use when you're trying to go fast. It just doesn't fit with your moveset at all, and while it is really funny, it does end up feeling a little bit clunky, which sucks, unless you use it to shoot downwards. Doing this gives you a shotgun double jump type thing, and then immediately transitions you into a downward slam, and it feels amazing. The shotgun's a weird example because one of its moves works really well, but the other desperately feels like it needs to be capable of being used to add to your momentum with its kickback or something. However, while the normal shot might seem kind of bad at first, the idea is actually to avoid using it as much as possible, finding ways to sneak uses of it in whenever you were already naturally gonna have lost speed, and then we're already going to be transitioning back into a faster speed with your other moves, which overall, I think makes the shotgun a passable power-up, if not a little bit of an uninteresting one. However, it is also only a passable power-up because it doesn't take anything away from your moveset other than replacing your grab, so mostly you can naturally make up for any weird momentum ruining stuff. Not all of Pizza Tower's power-ups have this luxury, unfortunately. As I've already said, the various power-ups in Pizza Tower are kind of a mixed bag. Some of them are downright brilliant, and well, others are... yeah. Alright, so, just for the sake of comparison, I would like to talk about Sonic Colors Wisps as an example of how not to do power-ups in a speed and flow-based game. The problem with the Wisps is that because of how they function, they fundamentally remove a feeling of flow from the game, because transitioning to them literally pauses the game. However, other than that, some of the Wisps are actually pretty good. The drill, for example, allows for some very interesting new directions for the level design to take. Spike can feel a bit awkward, but also changes the context of how you interact with the level. Pretty cool. Frenzy is kinda shallow, but it is pretty fun, and it feels fast, so that's good. However, the real problem children that I want to take a look at are things like Hover, Laser, and Cube, which kinda just slow the game down to a crawl for a bit and aren't very fun to use. The Laser feels more like playing Wii Sports Archery than Sonic. Hover changes the context of your moveset so much that it completely removes what makes Sonic so fun to control, and Cube... honestly, Cube could have been really cool, but you have to lose all of your speed whenever you use the block swap part of Cube, so it really is just not good. The main issue here that I wanted to briefly make clear before moving on to Pizza Tower again is that the power-ups in Sonic Colors are bad because they fundamentally disrupt the flow of the game. And with Pizza Tower, well, as I said, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, you have things like the rocket from Deep Dish 9, which is genuinely brilliant since literally nothing about it disrupts your sense of flow at all. It itself is fast and fun to use. It's a rocket. But additionally, transitioning into and out of it is basically seamless. Turning around also requires you to be touching the ground, so it also spices up the gameplay and allows for some pretty dynamic use cases. However, on the other hand, we can get stuff like the aforementioned Cheese Blob mode. Transitioning into Cheese Blob mode works okay, however, the rest of Cheese Blob mode completely neuters Peppino's moveset in a genuinely baffling way, which is why the only good use of it revolves around timing things so that you never need to actually do any platforming in Cheese Blob mode, and effectively stay in the transition phase of Cheese Blob mode as long as possible. Other power-ups have different problems, namely with being awkward to transition into, like with the Peppybot Pizza Box power-up. That is quite the name to pronounce. Or, worst of all, the Spicy Chicken power-up. Now, the Spicy Chicken power-up is a pretty fun dash-based ability, however, the only way to actually obtain it is to wait for this dude here to throw a spicy drumstick at you. And God forbid you be approaching him at a fast rate, because if you do that, you're gonna startle him. And if you startle him, you then need to wait for him to calm down again, and then attack. It's really bad. As I have said, the power-ups are probably consistently the worst part of Pizza Tower. Though, thankfully a lot of them are at least very well made and fun to use, and are often really interestingly woven into how you need to plan a route through a level, like where you sometimes need to traverse through the same rooms multiple times with or without a power-up. Like with hot sauce mode from Refrigerator, Freezerator, where you need to use it to melt ice blocks during the first lap of pizza time to clear a safe and easy to navigate path for yourself when you make the run through during lap 2, without the power-up, since Peppino will forcibly cool himself down with a nice glass of milk right before the lap 2 portal. Pizza Tower clearly does understand how to make power-ups that alter the game in ways that actually work with the speed and flow-based design philosophy of the game. Transitioning out of the power-ups is usually always seamless, since the way you lose most of them is based on touching priests. That sounds really bad, but in this case, the priests are bringing you salvation from Mort the Chicken, a classic Christianity moment. Anyway, point is that passing by the priests will immediately revert Peppino back to his normal form, while also maintaining all of the momentum you built up and allowing you to immediately keep running, which means that almost all of the game's power-ups end up flowing together quite nicely with your normal movement. Not only that, but the game almost never makes you use these power-ups for extended periods of time. Any new forms that remove aspects of your movement usually only stick around for a brief period of time, such that they serve as brief moments of variety without completely changing how the game works for an entire level, and usually serve as interesting ways to shake up how you need to approach your routing and planning when moving through a given section. Though, I still cannot ignore the Sonic-style blunders that do occur in a few levels due to the power-ups. A really great baseline for how Pizza Tower's power-ups tend to work on average is, fittingly, the very first one that the game throws at you, Night Mode. In the level Pizzascape, you will eventually stumble across a sword embedded in a stone. Using the grab button on it causes Peppino to draw the sword and don a suit of armor. This power-up is both really good and kinda bad at the same time. The way it works is pretty easy to grasp. It's a heavy suit of armor, so you are pretty slow while using it, and it's super clunky while walking on flat surfaces. Being an incredibly heavy metal suit of armor, you do naturally get a double jump. You also instantly stomp enemies to death when you come into contact with them. The sword is just kind of decorative, I guess. Wow, this is awful. Why would they even make this? Whoop. The armor, as it turns out, is so heavy that upon touching a slope, Peppino immediately begins to slide uncontrollably, extending his sword out in front of him for fear of his life. This is where the power-up actually gets really cool, because it turns into a really fun and flowy change to your moveset that asks you to interact with the slopes in a room in a unique way, while also adding the extra challenge that you need to plan your movements a bit more in advance since you cannot change directions unless you touch a different slope. The double jump serves thus as a satisfying tool to aid you in avoiding walls and other obstacles, and while midair, you have access to this downwards thrust, which you can use above slopes to help build up speed as well as change direction quickly. This overall leads to some really fun segments in the level it's featured in due to the unique way it lets you interact with the environment. Plus, transitioning out of it is basically seamless because you can transition straight back into running right after you find a priest, which, as everybody knows, is the natural predator on the food chain above the medieval knight. Main problem with this power-up is how you transition into it, because the knighting animation does not maintain your speed and completely stops your movement. Thankfully, in most cases, all you need to do in order to get back on track is immediately jump to the slide and then do a downward slam, as the game tends to make sure to put slopes nearby where you grab it, except for these rooms where you get these really awful and slow platforming bits that you cannot speed up for at all, that feel straight out of a Sonic game. There's also this section right as you exit one of the secret stages where you just kind of have to walk for a bit. It only ends up slowing the game down in 3 cases, and most of the time this level is designed so that the forced slowdown is not noticeable. However, the couple parts where you have to just walk around in a slow and heavy suit of armor still exist, and a lot of the power-ups in Pizza Tower end up being like this, striking this middle ground where they are mostly fine, but have 1 or 2 cases where they do just slow things down, which is unfortunate. Now, before moving on, I need to mention Gustavo and Brick, the dynamic duo themselves. I don't want to linger on them for too long because the main thing I have to say about them just kind of reiterates the points I already made about power-ups, so I'll keep this relatively brief. As characters, I love Gustavo and Brick. I really do. They're hilarious, but To be honest, the 2 levels where you actually play as them are, in my eyes, mainly just highlights for what makes Peppino so special and fun to control. Gustavo and Brick offer an entirely new moveset for the player to mess around with for a couple of levels. It's really cool. The transition screens between the 2 of them and Peppino are goddamn hilarious. However, when playing as Gustavo and Brick, I can't help but notice their limitations when compared to Peppino. Their moveset is quite expansive, and they have a much bouncier feel when compared to Peppino. However, unlike Peppino, their different moves rarely interact with their speed to allow them to all be chained together. Because of this, playing as them feels a lot more like playing a Sonic game compared to Pizza Tower. Much like Sonic, their levels aren't bad, and there are a lot of really well-made sections that can feel amazing to speed through. However, their moves don't really allow for them to truly engage with their environment nearly as much as Peppino can. Take their double jump, for example. You can perform a double jump, which lets you smash metal blocks upon landing. However, you lose all of your speed. You can kick Brick forward like a bowling ball to annihilate enemies ahead of you, but you lose all of your speed. You can do this spin punch thing with Gustavo, which feels a lot like a similar move from Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends. However, it resets your speed, so you can't use it as a fun way to speed up or handle enemies like Peppino's grab. There are some really fun, flowy sections for Gustavo and Brick. However, much like a Sonic game, in order to achieve that feeling of momentum and flow, the game needs to build very specific, predetermined paths and methods to automatically allow Gustavo and Brick to speed back up again. Much like Sonic, it can still feel satisfying, and it's still fun, but to me, I can't help but notice how much more versatile Peppino feels. Peppino's moves are so expressive that unless the game throws something truly bafflingly poorly thought out at you, it rarely ever feels like there just isn't a way to move through a section fast. This is why Peppino, in my eyes, from a gameplay standpoint, feels like an evolved version of Sonic. The levels, well, they still need to have his moves in mind, don't need to fit nearly as specific of a structure in order to still be fun. Something that is perfectly shown off by Gustavo and Brick being so limited in comparison. Okay, so Pizza Tower does a pretty great job at being a Sonic game, but didn't I say it was easy? How does it stop itself from being boring? It's score-based. Other than Pizza Face and the bosses, you can't die. Shouldn't this game have the same problem as something like Kirby's Epic Yarn, where the lack of true risk makes the game overall kind of boring? It should, yeah, but miraculously, it doesn't. This, I think, is the final piece of the puzzle that makes Pizza Tower so brilliant. See, the other things I have discussed thus far are still things that are successfully pulled off in some Sonic games. Despite usually feeling a little bit more like Gustavo and Brick than Peppino, Sonic's movement is usually still pretty solid. And across the Sonic franchise, there still have been some really well put together levels, such as Green Hill Zone or City Escape. But the one big aspect of game design that I don't really think any single Sonic game properly pulls off. I haven't actually played some of the newest I haven't played Sonic Frontiers or anything that came after it, so I might be wrong with this point, but everything before that point, at the very least, it fits this. The thing that I don't really think many Sonic games ever actually pull off consistently is a difficulty curve. It's not just creating a fun gameplay idea, but expanding upon it over the course of an entire video game, in a meaningful way that doesn't take away from the intended design goals. Okay, so difficulty curves are a very in-depth and nuanced subject when it comes to game design. In general, you want a difficulty curve that ramps things up appropriately enough so that players don't get bored and remain engaged throughout the entire runtime of the game, but not so steep that players get overwhelmed and frustrated. Now, I want to note that this interpretation is only a general guideline for how difficulty curves should work, and is not gospel for every single video game ever, as intentionally subverting this basic outline for artistic effect can greatly enhance a game when it is done in a way that adds to the rest of the game's ideas. For example, take the Dark Souls series, things like Sekiro, Elden Ring. Those games need to have a steep difficulty curve, because creating that sense of hopelessness in the face of a seemingly unbeatable foe simply cannot be done if you aren't feeling like the game is pushing your limits. This is also true of games like Celeste and Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, whose artistic ideas of learning to cope with mental illness and failure necessitate a difficult experience. However, on the other extreme end of the spectrum, you get something like the Stanley Parable, which doesn't have any sort of a difficulty curve at all, and is left intentionally tedious in order for the idea the game is trying to get across to properly work. A less extreme example is a game called Inscription, where the game is intentionally made really easy to get to the end of, so that the main idea of exploring the mystery that is revolving around this card card game always remains as the main focus of the game. However, for a game like Sonic or Pizza Tower, where the designer isn't trying to create any sort of extra effect outside of just being really fun and maybe being the most bonkers game just ever, the difficulty curve necessarily needs to be one that revolves mainly around the core design philosophies of the game, and how a game ramps up the difficulty should maintain the core identity of the game. Once again, using Mario as an example, Mario is a game all about precise jumps and timing, which means that the natural way to increase the difficulty as the game progresses is to have more dangerous and complicated obstacles, more bottomless pits and insta-kill mechanics to make failure less forgiving, harder enemies with more complicated patterns, tighter jumps, more jumps, just in general. Pretty simple stuff. For something like a Pokemon game, a natural difficulty increase would be based around needing to deal with foes that have more well-rounded teams that require better strategies and team composition in order to succeed. Or, you know, just more grinding, I guess, but that's a whole other... That's an entire other can of worms for a video about Pokemon. In games like Ultra Kill or Doom Eternal, enemies will become more challenging, encounters less forgiving, and generally you need to be more aware of how to use your arsenal and moveset in order to actually succeed. The common theme amongst all of these is that as the game increases in difficulty, the game still maintains its core identity. In fact, when done extremely well, the hardest parts of the game are the areas where the game's identity shines through the brightest and most coherently, as if the entire game was just training you and preparing you to properly experience the true vision that developers had for the game. And as I've already kind of stated, this is where Sonic games most consistently end up failing. Sure, most Sonic games do have a difficulty curve, and they certainly ramp up the challenge, however, oftentimes it comes at the expense of the core identity of the game, which is supposed to be speed and maintaining a sense of flow. You simply cannot just add extra hazards or more complex enemies to Sonic and still maintain the vision for the game. Because if the game becomes too much about slower paced, precise platforming, then the game stops feeling like the game. That's where you get those really awkward parts of Sonic games, such as Marble Zone or Labyrinth Zone or the Knuckles sections or in Sonic Adventure or whatever the hell is going on in this part of Sonic Colors. Sure, these parts of the games are more difficult, but because of how they make themselves more difficult, they no longer resemble the fast-paced, momentum-based platformer that you saw back in the first levels of most Sonic games. Aside from the visuals and the characters, do this and this really look like they belong in the same game? And because Sonic usually tends to struggle to expand upon its core ideas, the Sonic franchise rarely ever manages to unlock the true potential of what Sonic can be. And this is Pizza Tower's ultimate advantage over Sonic, because the difficulty curve of the game is entirely based around the core idea of replaying the levels to master them. As I previously stated, unless you get kersploinked by Pizza Face, there just isn't any way to die, which overall makes it relatively simple to get to the credits of the game. Though if all you do is just play through the game by doing the bare minimum, the game absolutely makes sure you understand that you aren't really getting the full experience the whole way through. Ranking system aside, all of the other aspects of the games are also actually just constantly doing their best to try to get you to be better at moving fast and analyzing rooms and understanding Peppino's movement. First of all, you have Pizza Time, which is a very obvious and unsubtle way to make you move fast. However, Pizza Time is also at the end of levels so that you have a chance to understand the unique twists that the level introduces before you absolutely need to do it fast. However, even on the run to Pillar John, the game is still subtly pushing you to get used to and more comfortable with going fast. Take enemies, for example, which, as I have already covered, are basically non-factors as long as you're maintaining high speeds. Dealing with them, especially the ones with sharp pointy objects pointed at you, is just way easier when you're moving fast. So even if a newer player isn't actually capable of maintaining that fast speed for very long, because the game has taught them that the easiest way to handle enemies is to just barrel straight through them with reckless abandon, they will naturally be at least trying to reach those higher speeds for the sake of immediate convenience, which will immediately start to get most players thinking about ways that they can not have to slow down as soon as things get a bit more complicated than just going in a single direction. They'll start to learn more ways to use the environment to speed up, how to deal with complicated room setups, and then the game will throw metal blocks at them, which are just speed checks to make sure that the players are thinking about moving fast, even if they didn't naturally start doing it. And then, based on, needing to go fast to break through metal blocks and whatnot, it's a feedback loop that then feeds back into getting players thinking about moving fast for killing all of the enemies and navigating rooms. I mean, the game starts doing this basically immediately. Remember that combo of 2 rooms in John Gutter that I talked about? The first room forces you to at least make it to Mach 3 to progress, and by doing so you are all but forced to realize just how much more convenient the level becomes when you're moving at higher speeds, because the level also puts a bunch of enemies in the way. And then the next room immediately takes away that speed in a way that can technically be avoided, which will naturally cause players to think about optimization. The secret gauntlets are all condensed platforming challenges, most of which require you to move Peppino through more complex spaces in a speedy fashion. Once the game starts introducing power-ups, most power-ups force some form of speed or momentum onto the player, where they must suddenly try their darndest to maintain control over Peppino as they are suddenly thrust into a situation where they need to kind of just figure it out. And because most of the power-ups simplify Peppino's moveset, it isn't as overwhelming to be forced to move quick by them for newer players, as there are less buttons that you need to consider now. The Night Suit, which is the very first power-up the game ever throws at you, is the perfect example of this. Everything except walking, jumping, and your ground slam are completely removed. However, once you hit a slope, you begin to slide forwards and must time jumps and ground slams in order to keep your momentum, while also getting a double jump to make certain things a little easier. And you, of course, need to actually make sure you're maintaining this speed, because otherwise you won't be able to get past the special rat blocks. Bloodsauce Dungeon literally forces you to think about how you can keep your speed vertically. The whole level is just a big tower, and so by playing it, you will learn a lot of valuable details about how to move Peppino vertically in an efficient manner, like how he will automatically run up walls as long as you're airborne while running, which can both be very helpful and very counterproductive. Ancient Cheese adds the cheese blocks, which fade underneath you and require constant movement. Fast Food and Saloon has timed switches that require you to make tight maneuvers through brief platforming sections, and Horsey the Rocking Horse will race you for bonus collectibles, just for a little bit of extra motivation. In Waste Yard, the ghost of Pillar John chases you down during pizza time, and is functionally an easier, more forgiving version of Pizza Face since he slows down whenever he gets close to the player, and will only send you back to the beginning of a room instead of killing you, once again getting you used to just moving a little bit faster than normal. Levels like Golf challenge you to understand your moveset in a more fluent way by putting you in a new context. Deep Dish 9 uses portals and rockets to add a whole new layer to building up your speed. It ups the challenge in a meaningful way without just making it feel like a different game. Heck, even the game's worst level, Oh Shit, still feels like Pizza Tower. And even now, as I'm making this video, I'm still coming up with new ways to get through the level better. All culminating in the big finale world, which is where the FNAF level comes in, which shouldn't come as a surprise at this point because of how much its unique mechanics encourage and enforce playing at fast speeds. And right before the final boss, we get the level War. War is a bit of a unique level compared to the others, as, unlike every level thus far, there is no pizza time, and a countdown begins immediately after you pick up the shotgun at the very start of the level. This is the first time, outside of pizza time and the bosses, that the game really pushes back against the player. Because when the timer runs out, you just immediately lose. There's no pizza face chase, you're just dead. However, scattered throughout the entire level, there are these special computer monitors, and then finding and destroying them will add a small amount of time to the countdown, which means that you have to constantly be moving from computer to computer, turning the level into a mad dash for the exit. All you need to do is make it from point A to point B. However, this level actually will try to kill you doing that. Now, because this level actually tries to kill you, and is the first time where you absolutely need to keep moving throughout the entire level just to beat it, the game gives you the shotgun, which makes clearing a path for newer players a little bit more forgiving, since this is one of the first times where they are made to react to a completely new level moving fast for as long as the level makes you do it. However, as was previously stated, the shotgun does make you lose your momentum when you shoot it, and since you're on a strict timer, newer players need to learn to use it sparingly, only when absolutely necessary, otherwise you are most likely going to run out of time. The most efficient way through most parts of this level is still to just not use the shotgun unless you absolutely have to. However, the shotgun, despite its flaws, I think is the perfect tool to allow for less experienced players to have some extra options they can use while they are still getting used to a level being this unforgiving. Also, the timer doesn't stop when you enter the level's secret gauntlets, so you need to be extra efficient when going for them. Not only that, but going for a P rank means you have to go for a lap 2, which will remove your shotgun. It gives you a few extra time monitors at the start and says, okay, now do it fast, but without the shotgun. It's a really clever escalation of the base mechanics. But we aren't quite done yet. After the final boss, you have one last level, one final hurrah, where you find out that the entire tower and all of the hub areas were just part of one massive level, as you put everything you have learned throughout the entire game to the test one last time for the final sprint all the way down the tower. Basically, everything comes back, even golf. You get to do a golf yet another time. You pick up all the bosses on your way out of the tower, Snotty, Gustavo, and Brick. It's an amazing time. And the game has given you everything you need to get through it probably on your first try. It's basically just a victory lap, a big final example of, hey, look how good you've gotten, yet you can do this probably really easily. This level also doesn't have any secrets or a tower treasure or even a lap 2, which fittingly makes it the easiest level to P-rank. With the skills you would have from getting here and the familiarity you have with Peppino's moveset at this point, you're pretty likely to get an S rank on your first go. And the reason this level being so easy to P-rank is fitting in my eyes is because it means this level, while it serves as the big finale of the game's story, is the perfect transition into going for P-rank attempts on all of the other levels. Something to really build your confidence and get you excited for getting a P-rank on the rest of the levels. But if it doesn't get you excited, it at least gives you a taste of how it feels to move through an entire level at such a high speed. Now, since we are discussing difficulty, I basically have to mention Secrets of the World, which is a final secret level that was added in the 2023 Halloween update. The only way to get it is by finding all of the secrets in every level, before you are faced with this beast. This level is kind of entirely different in its design philosophy compared to the rest of the game. It's the first level that is actively meant to be actually difficult to beat. The game's only true endurance test that isn't just going for P-ranks. It's a collection of every single secret challenge gauntlet, back to back to back, but every one of them has a 25-second time limit, meaning unless the secret room is super short or you fail early on in it, you basically need to get all of them on your first try. Not only that, but the order is completely randomized, so you can't just memorize the order. It's a true test of your understanding of Peppino and how well you can adapt to relatively new circumstances on the fly, which I think makes it a very interesting and a unique way to challenge players in ways they might not have expected. Oh, also, a single cheese blob is put in the first room because you can P-rank this level, and it's also really fun to do so. While it doesn't have the same level of thinking and planning involved in P-ranking the other levels, where you need to carefully consider routing and whatnot, it's kinda not really meant to be. It serves as just an extended gauntlet where you need to constantly maneuver Peppino in an adept manner, and honestly, it's really fun to replay in its own way, a fun and ever-changing playground to really test your skills. Pizza Tower, with that, has expanded upon its gameplay ideas. It's not just one or two good levels, it's an entire game that is built around teaching you to go fast and move efficiently, and preparing you to do P-ranks. And that's why I think it's sort of a more expanded upon version of what Sonic has been so desperately trying to achieve for decades. Anyway, that's all I really have to say about the game without getting bizarrely off track. I'm still new at this whole video essays thing, so I don't really know how to quite end this properly yet. Right, okay, so, while I was in the middle of working on this video, Pizza Tower kinda dropped a game-changing update where it introduced a new Game Plus mode where you play as an entirely different character with a unique moveset. The Scrungly himself, the Noise. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about the Noise, mainly because I would just be reiterating a lot of the same points that I already made. However, the Noise update is just too damn amazing for me to not talk about. So I'm duct taping this section on to the end of my video, and you can't do anything to stop me. The Noise is a masterclass on how to do alternate characters in a speed-based game. First of all, just the concept of having players traverse through the same levels as an entirely different character with a new moveset is both a very good idea and a very bad idea. Having a new moveset means that your players now have a new way to engage with all of your levels, which, if the new character is different enough compared to the main playstyle, you now effectively have an entirely new game, as the new moveset breathes a second life into the already existing levels. Problem is, the levels were likely originally designed with the specific capabilities of the game's primary character in mind, and so having an entirely new character that could potentially control completely differently to what the levels can accommodate for can just end up being extremely unsatisfying. This is the main reason why the developers of the game Shovel Knight decided to just start making entirely new sets of levels for 2 of their DLC characters, since they were running into quite a few design problems and limitations with their first alternate playable character, Plague Knight. Thankfully, this is not a problem Pizza Tower has, for the most part. In order to make sure the Noise can still actually comfortably engage with the levels that were built for Peppino, the Noise still maintains the skeleton of Peppino's movement. His max speed-based running, turning around, grab sliding. In terms of horizontal movement, the Noise is almost entirely the same as Peppino. However, the 2 characters diverge significantly when you look at their vertical capabilities. This is something that the 2D Sonic games already kind of did themselves when having playable characters like Tails and Knuckles. Tails and Knuckles both take the fundamentals of Sonic's moveset while tweaking his capabilities to be unique. However, in my opinion, they don't actually manage to pull it off in a very satisfying way. Tails' flying ability is, well, really slow, as effective as it is, and Knuckles isn't much better himself with his wall climbing. Both of which do solve some of Sonic's vertical limitations, but in a very slow, unflowy way. Knuckles' glide is alright, however it also doesn't maintain your speed as well, so it's kinda just Sonic Mania, being the best game in the entire Sonic series, does the idea of a flying character absolutely amazing with Freddy the Raccoon, who just, I mean, look at him go. And thankfully for Pizza Tower, the Noise ends up going the Ray the Raccoon route instead of the Tails route with how he mixes up the game's movement compared to good old Peppino. This difference in how the 2 characters must approach vertical displacement is kind of the core for how the Noise is effectively able to serve as the New Game Plus version of Peppino, since the complexity of vertical movement is raised significantly when compared to Peppino. And, if you remember, Peppino's ability to move upwards and downwards so easily is part of what allows him to succeed in a lot of ways that good old Sonic can't keep up with in terms of satisfying level design. Nerfing the vertical movement is something that the developers of Pizza Tower already kinda did before. A lot of the power-ups, as well as the sections where you play as Gustavo and Brick, are entirely based around changing up how you interact with verticality. Problem is, especially in the case of Gustavo and Brick, they kinda did it a little awkwardly. The wall bouncing of Gustavo and Brick is clunky slow and doesn't allow for you to maintain momentum. The pair might have a lot of different moves, however those moves don't really work with each other all too well. I kinda forgot to talk about this before, but it's also why I don't think the extra additions to Sonic's moveset in the 3D games work all that well. And by that I mean like the Sonic Adventure games specifically. Things like the light speed dash, the bounce, and the homing attack are all kinda neat in a vacuum, however they also don't really flow well with the rest of Sonic's moves and with each other at all. Okay, well, except for the homing attack flows pretty well with a lot of things, but it also kills your momentum, so it's... The Noise, however, does not have any of these problems at all. Instead of a wall run, the Noise has a skateboard, and will kickflip off of walls to gain height. This is basically just a better version of Gustavo and Brick's wall bounce, and is on average speedier than Peppino's wall run, unless you're counting moving out Mach 4. However, unlike the wall run, the vertical distance you get from the skateboard bounce is noticeably finite compared to the wall run. Thankfully, you can press the grab button midair during this state to do like a spinny dash type thing in whatever direction you want, and if you hit a wall doing this, then you can do another bounce upwards. However, these cannot be chained together infinitely since each bounce has diminishing returns on your height, which is where the big ol' stamper comes in. By pressing up and the jump button at the same time, you do a big leap into a smash with the stamper, which can break through metal blocks and damage enemies. It, however, also gives you a lot of height, and it can be cancelled with the spinny move from before, so you can chain it together with the wall kickflip bounce for some extremely fun movement. And you can also just chain it into itself multiple times and fucking fly! Landing on the ground after doing the spin move or a wall kickflip also transitions you into Mach 3, so yeah, lots of speed. The last important detail about the Noise is his Beyblade mode! Instead of a belly slam, the Noise turns into a fucking Beyblade of death. Ending the Beyblade mode will also transition you straight into Mach 3, which chains super well with the rest of the Noise's moveset. You, however, must be careful in Beyblade mode as you are still vulnerable to damage. Overall, this gives the Noise a much more acrobatic feel compared to Peppino, where you are bouncing off of walls to continuously get to Mach 3 really fast. While the Noise is undoubtedly a more versatile character compared to Peppino, he is still an effective new game plus for Pizza Tower, as the extra complexity required to move upwards while maintaining speed is much more complicated compared to Peppino, and takes some extra thought and practice before you can chain things together super well. If controlling Peppino felt like you were dealing with an anxiety-ridden deer, then the Noise is a vortex of pure chaos. However, the important thing is that it is still possible to chain things together. The Noise does not sacrifice the game's flow at all, which, combined with the fact that he's built off of the same basic skeleton as Peppino and thus generally still works well in Peppino's levels and Gustavo and Brick's levels, is what makes him such a brilliant addition to the game. He even honestly sometimes feels better than Peppino in a select few sections of the game, and because of this, the Noise is a near-perfect addition to the game. Oh, right, I'll briefly go over power-ups as well. The Noise also significantly mixes up how the power-ups in Pizza Tower work, to, mixed results. In general, the Noise's versions of the power-ups are much bouncier and more chaotic compared to what Peppino gets, which mostly works out fine, and actually usually fixes some of the pacing problems that Peppino's power-ups run into all too often. However, it sometimes also does just take away from what made some of the power-ups so interesting in the first place. Plus, the Noise's version of the shotgun is genuinely just not fun. It's really funny, but it completely stops your movement, and the mechanic where it kind of pushes you backwards, so you could sort of maybe use it as a rocket booster, jetpack joyride style, also doesn't really end up working that well or being satisfying. Once again, to properly highlight the quality of the Noise's power-ups, the Night Suit, just like with Peppino, is fittingly the best example of how the Noise's power-ups both add to the game and take away from it. The Noise's Night Suit now bounces off of walls and maintains its movement speed in the opposite direction after bouncing off of the walls, which basically entirely fixes almost all of the unavoidable slow sections that the Night Suit would run into for Peppino, because you just automatically get to maintain your speed in more scenarios, which vastly improves the pacing of multiple sections. However, the fact that you can simply bounce off of walls to maintain momentum also takes away from one of the more interesting aspects of the Night Suit, the downward thrust. You no longer need to carefully time when you do a downwards thrust over top of slopes in order to maintain maximum momentum, which is really unfortunate, but it's only a small issue overall. The Noise, because of how he differs from Peppino while still having a moveset that flows with itself, means that the Noise ends up being an extremely satisfying New Game Plus mode. The limitations that the Noise has alongside his expanded options allow the Noise to navigate the same levels as Peppino, however, doing so is usually a lot more complicated when compared to Peppino, which makes the Noise very fun for more experienced players to mess around with once they have gotten used to Peppino. Anyway, now that I've covered the Noise, because it came out right in the middle of when I was working on it, I am actually properly finally done. For real this time. Thank you so much, actually, if you managed to make it this far into the video. It really means a lot that you at least found my crazed rambling coherent and entertaining enough to, at the very least, have me playing in the background while you do something else. This is my very first video, and it was quite the undertaking for me. I put a lot of work into it, and I enjoyed the heck out of making it. So if you actually enjoyed it, that is super awesome. And I plan on making quite a few more videos about a wide variety of topics. For now, I'm starting with just game design stuff, but I also might want to try topics like science and mathematics. I apologize if some parts of this felt a bit rough around the edges. I maybe should have done something a little bit smaller for my first ever video project, but oh well, too late now. If you have any criticisms or thoughts on how I could improve for the next videos, feel free to leave a detailed comment about it, since I have the luxury of reading and responding to things, because I'm guessing not too many people are gonna see this. Anyway, I hope you have a nice day to whomever is watching. Remember to drink water. Bye-bye!